Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm Jonathan. This is my channel. As you can tell by the portrait on the easel, we're going to be continuing my work on what is kind of a dual purpose exploration. On the one hand, this gives me something that I can show off to you guys about the generic look of Soldiers of Canalan, as well as it's going to be part of my project to make images that can be used to create art cards approximately the size of a Magic the Gathering card so that it doesn't become obnoxious. With the intention being that those of you who play games like Magic and need tokens, if you like the images I have created here, you'll be able to use them in your various games to create things that, like in this case, it would be a fairly easy thing to be like, hey, you're creating soldier tokens because you're playing that kind of Magic deck. So I'm trying to do the things that I post here as kind of that dual purpose. There is a product available in here, in what I'm making, that can just be, hey, I happen to really like the style of the guy on this channel, and I want some artwork, but I don't have room on my, maybe you don't have room on your wall for, getting a big 11 by 14 print of my artwork, but you really like it. You decide that's how you want to do something to support the channel. When I get a few more of these done, because I have to balance how many images I have with how much it's going to cost me to get cards printed, and then find ways of selling to people who are interested in my image making. And that takes a little doing. That's going to take both making it clear here and other places where you can find my work, which is primarily here on YouTube, or I do have other stuff posted on Instagram, which that is just Jonathan R. Ank. If you go look me up on Instagram to give me follows there. If I can get some things to work, I'm hoping to be able to live stream on several platforms at once. That way people can come and we can ask questions and actually interact about the things that I'm doing, why I'm doing them, what kind of projects I foresee with it. Because at some point I'm going to start doing projects based on the thinking that I've been doing about my world. That will be a bit more of the those will be things that will be more likely, images that are more likely to end up in, say, an RPG book than these cards necessarily, but especially because I intend to create them here with my YouTube audience. We'll find ways that you guys can both support just the general project as we go. I think this is a place I need to back things off a little to do what I want to do. Or the other thing I need to do is start linking my Patreon in here so that you guys, those of you who do Patreon and appreciate what I'm doing, can hop over there, and we'll start figuring out how best to reward those of you who are willing to support in more direct ways what's going on. And, you know, again, I'm still trying to piece all of these different parts together in my head. It's part of the reason why, for all that I've known how useful Patreon and YouTube and all of these other social media sites can work to actually get an audience put together. I felt like I need to be able to show up with a complete enough set of a product that we can talk in realistic terms, instead of it just being well, I kind of think I want to do these kinds of things, and you know, it sounds really good, but I don't know how to deliver on things, and now we're having all kinds of extra concerns, and it just sort of peters out as it goes. So it's why I'm not rushing too far forward. And in addition to some of that is the reality that, you know, I'm a father and husband, and, you know, my family ultimately will take higher priority than some of this, because that's what I think a good man does. And so it's going to be, you know, taking into account, okay, what does my family actually need from me in some of these situations, versus where can I actually establish what I'm doing and bring things to have everybody else into the crazy worlds that I have created in my head. Since I can't necessarily have all of you, say, join my D&D games. So, which some of that will actually come as a blessing, and some of you can sit here and, as I get more into designing and developing a D&D book, some of you might be able to look forward to getting a hold of and playing with that. And there are going to be certain things that I try my best not to spoil. And then there are other things that it's going to be, okay, well, this is, because this thing is coming out soon, we're going to start playing with some ideas, and we may, you know, like, I may see if I can get some of the group that I do play D&D with to figure out ways that we could live stream, not in an attempt to compete with any of the major live stream events, but just simply if we're developing a product that is supposed to be for D&D, and I want to drum up support for it, the best way that I think I can do that is going to be coming on here and demonstrating what we're building. Doing so in a way that, maybe we don't reveal all of the secret traps and, surprises, so that if if you also DM and decide that this is a product you'd like to pick up, you can read those. But if your players get a little, shall we say, nosy about what you're playing, they can't come on here and figure out all of the things that are available in the supplement. They'll have to still do exploration and whatnot. Because that has been like, I got something of a masterclass in that. If you go to watch shows now, it's older and disbanded because of some controversy stuff, so if you care about the controversy, whatever. I really don't. But Dice Camera Action was a lot of fun as they developed, like, they basically were playing alongside the 5th edition releases, starting with Curse of Strahd. And you got to watch Chris Perkins, who's a very, very, for the way that he DMs, he's an extremely brilliant DM. Very professional, very good at both taking things that players are doing in the moment and going, yes, and as much as possible. There are times that he kind of slaps his players because they're getting a little too... they're playing a little too strongly to the audience, as opposed to playing the game with enough veracity that it's okay, you're playing the character, you've established them this way, and you know what, yes, that actually would be something that seems entirely in character for that character to do. So yes, we'll run with it. And then there are a few times that some of his characters get a little too... we have an audience and we play to them. And he's kind of... he's one of those DMs who's good at going, if you're making the game fun, let's run with it. If you're just doing this for the lulz, then no, let's play this a little bit more seriously. And I feel like he does a very good job of balancing those two extremes as a dungeon master. Because again, he's pretty well known for being one of the people that really does back the caveat that Wizards includes in the player's handbook, that ultimately this is a game and it's supposed to be fun. So if you run into a situation where the rules are impinging on the fun in a way that is easy to accept alteration. So for instance, one of the things that I have made part of my world, which is not true to the rules as written for multi-classing, comes from those of you who like playing multiple kinds of casters. In traditional 5th edition, you learn whatever cantrips you get and they all power up based on your overall level, not how many levels you've taken in each casting class. And I had one player who was not a big fan of the fact that I go, no, I feel like the different kinds of magic are different enough in the source of their power. You know, like, if you're a cleric wizard, learning how to essentially scientifically alter reality with wizard spells teaches you nothing about going to God and going, hey, can you give me power to do these things? It's just not there. So I have it is your cantrips get more powerful relative to the casting class that cantrip is from. So some of them that's less of an like I would consider, because there's a couple of overlaps between wizard and warlock. Um, like those I have less trouble going, okay, you can kind of buff both of them at the same time. If it is the same cantrip, you're using it, you're familiar with both ways of casting it, I might ask you to clarify as you go to cast what source of power you're reaching for. Especially because, if you're playing, say, a wild magic sorcerer and a wizard, I gotta know if I gotta roll on the wild magic table and see what kind of shenanigans you messing with the fabric of reality does. While if you feel this is a case where you're far more controlled and it is in fact like you're invoking this thing through your understanding of. See, I feel like wizards are magical scientists. I don't think that's an especially dogmatic claim to make when you see a lot of the things that they're supposed to do. But essentially, they learn their things by studying how the world around them reacts to magic. That's science. So it's a matter of, okay, do you understand how you can reach into the fabric of reality in this moment to... Sorry, looking for some sandpaper. Do you feel like you're more likely reaching into the fabric of reality based on your understanding of reality, or is this still your wild magic self going, pulling a Samuel L. Jackson, hold on to your butts, kind of moment, which will determine how I go about arbitrating, how your spell invocation works and what kinds of reactions you get in the world around you. But it is one of those that, and I understand his frustration with me changing that set of rules. But again, I'm looking at it going, okay, you have, by the way Wizards writes it, there's basically three kinds of magic in the world. You have the arcane, which is just kind of here's all of our standard understanding of manipulation of the universe, and that encompasses things like fireball and, like I saw somebody posted a very interesting kind of essay about, like, tensors. Actually, I think it's Matt Colville talks about the fact that the named spells, i.e. Tensor's floating disk, is actually basically new magic. And in the D&D lore, there's, Ortaluk, there's Tensor, there's all of these guys. And essentially, if you're using a spell that is named, the implication is those just, if you will, those are trademarked because they just got discovered, where Fireball is such an ancient kind of magic that everybody kind of knows what it is, and it's no longer attributed to one specific wizard who figured out how to use bat poop and certain words to pull on the magic weave of the world and create an explosion of fire, where you would like to have a nice big explosion of fire. Whereas you have some of those moments where, or some of the spells where it's like, okay, this person just kind of developed this in the last few years. It's just starting to, these are the kinds of spells that new wizards are going to college to find out about. That sort of thing. Which I just thought was a very fascinating take on it. But again, it's that this goes to there are several ways to have gotten magic or use magic to manipulate the world around you, and it's based on how you do that as to how I see the world reacting to the magic that you've invoked. Like I said, then you have things like, you have Druid's natural magic, which draws on the power of the planet itself it becomes supernatural insofar as it's happening at speeds at which it normally wouldn't. When a druid casts one of the storm spells, for instance, they're tapping into the world's power to create these things, which the world already has. The druid just has learned how to call certain phenomena into being much faster than the world would, and in places that the world wouldn't necessarily naturally, in the middle of a cave thousands of miles from the coast, you're not likely to accidentally spawn, the world is not likely to generate a hurricane or, a wave, a tsunami wave or anything like that, because those are not the conditions for it. And so the druid being able to do that is because they understand how to use what the world can already produce in a way that makes what they do supernatural, because it goes beyond what it ought to do. And yeah, there's lots of things where I go, yep, we've got some things out there, like people have been living in this world for thousands of years at least. And they've learned things about how it worked. Some of them have found connection with God, and that unlocks their capacity to bring certain things into being. Other people have discovered things like the Fae and their capacity to manipulate world around them. And, it's much more taboo in my world because I very much buy into the mortals are kind of caught in a world that is at war between the forces of good and the forces of evil. I don't necessarily define how those forces see their role in the world. And part of that is I don't want to over define what can and can't happen in this world. Especially as I move towards not just making pretty pictures, but moving towards things that will eventually let other people come along and play in this world. I don't want to have to find all of the movers and shakers. I guess I would say I'm not trying to have you all play the same storyline, but giving you enough pieces to understand where I'm seeing things develop, how I think that people in the world would react to those developments. As various forces act in the world. Because, yeah, I do think there's going to be some, like, I do have at least a basic sketch of my big bad evil guy. And what he's trying to do, how he's trying to alter the world, get power, live the life he thinks he deserves, all that. And if I build an RPG book, the notion would be that is all available to the DMs who decide to pick up my world and use it to tell their stories. But the frank reality of my world is ultimately the conflicts that you're getting into are microcosms of greater cosmological forces working out the best that they can to influence the world. The forces of evil are, of course, trying to they're attempting to bring everything to the final state of entropy. So the forces of evil, the demonic forces, what have you, however you wish to parse what I mean when I say that, ultimately they're the things that want existence to cease. And again, we can talk both metaphorically and more directly about what exactly that might, what they think that should look like and what have you. But ultimately, that's, in my world, it's either everything has an opportunity to flourish and grow, or it is, working with forces, even if they themselves don't necessarily go that far. Okay, that is a lot darker than I wanted to do there. But yeah, essentially the forces of evil in the world ultimately want there to be nothingness, and nothingness under their own control. We could argue whether or not that was the goal of evil's rebellion against the creator. When things got kicked off in the time before time was measured, or, you know, how it works itself out. But that is ultimately what's happening, is you have the forces that are good forces, are the forces that are working to encourage life. Some of those forces are very directly related to a personal creator being. And mighty beings that that creator being put into place to govern tides and the natural forces of the world coming together. And then there are other forces that are trying to go, we don't like that existence happened. And since we can't force our things to be the way we want, we are going to attempt to shut down any other being's capacity to come in and enjoy life and the world. So that is one thing that, you know, my world is kind of predicated on, is the notion that the forces of evil enacting things are ultimately trying to end existence. It's part of the reasons why I go, you know, talked about in other videos, like, orcs ultimately have one goal when they meet mortal creatures, and that is they want to eat them. In this one, I kind of take the blending of, you know, Lord of the Rings lore and Robert Jordan lore about how Trollocs came to be, and all of these kinds of, I mean, at this point, they're fantasy tropes based on what Tolkien and, you know, many of the other pioneers in fantasy fiction came up with, where you know, your evil beings that essentially you can have run against your protagonists, and, you know, the fact that they're getting slaughtered in hundreds or thousands or whatever shouldn't have much by way, like, there's no moral wrong to it, because these creatures ultimately are fundamentally evil. They don't exist on the spectrum of redeemability, because they are designed beings, but they were designed by a broken, fallen angel. And really, it's not that they were given life so much as they were forced into existence. You know. So, I mean, I guess if you want to play in my world and, you know, have to struggle with the notion that you exist in a world against your own interests, you could play some of the evil creatures, and that would be a very fitting place for exploring some of those kinds of things. But yeah, the notion is that they're goblins, orcs, ogres, trolls, a lot of the traditional enemies of the heroes are beings that were made by the torture and manipulation of other creatures So goblins are kind of a tortured version of probably halflings and gnomes. And the reason I use both of those is most goblins don't have... They sort of have a raw genius for putting together contraptions. They're not specifically speaking engineers, which is why I don't think that they're... The creature pattern they were created from is not necessarily that of dwarves. They're more of an innate... These things are unstable, let's put them all together and watch everything explode. As opposed to a dwarf who's going, okay, I know these three things explode this big. If I add this in, I get this kind of effect added to said explosion, and that means I'll know I can clear X amount of rock under this mountain by setting off a charge with this stuff that is so big. And to me, gnomes are kind of these, like, they're geniuses in what they can come up with. It's a matter of course, okay, were they more nature-based, chaotic entities, or are they, did they find heaps of metal and have learned from there to create things that, quite frankly, shouldn't work, but there's just something about the way that they've been created that it works. And yeah, so that's, for me, I think where goblins kind of came from. Orcs are kind of a blend of human and dwarf and elf, in a way where you get kind of the best aggressive features of all three races, blended with the worst personality traits of all three races. And again, when you kind of see that if goblins are the halfling gnome combination of creature, then having the three kind of predominant species be the genesis for orcs kind of explains why, they've got some of that elven... Like, they don't necessarily have the lifespan of elves, but they have the... orcs just kind of give off this, we are better than goblins. We can reason far better. We're much less cowardly than they are. All of the things that might make one sit there and go like, okay, goblins are like a huge nuisance, but they're really not especially scary unless you get 200 or 300 of them near to each other. Where orcs are like, that band of 20 should not be ignored while they're around, or you might end up with real problems on your hand. Just based on what they like to do, and the fact that they are kind of innately more war-focused than the goblins are. Goblins are kind of evil chaos, which is beautiful. Like, that's just... I feel like you look at the things that are out there 4 goblins and orcs in 5th edition, and that it's clearly not how they've defined them, but I feel like it honors the spirit of, you know, these goblins are these kind of chaos incarnate creatures. Orcs are a little bit more regimented, organized, ready to, you know, take down the other mortal creatures so much sooner than many of the other races. But yeah, I like those being a part of. Okay, yeah, actually, these will all. Let's do that. Kind of blend it out soft so that it doesn't make too harsh of a line. Because that is one thing the shift from philosophies about fantasy worlds to art theory. There are no lines in nature. So there are distinct points in which a thing is and then a thing is not compared to what is behind it. But there aren't true lines. There are only places where planes move in a different direction than the rest of what you can see of the object. So, and if that's a difficult one, take some time. I wouldn't say famous because I've only said this to a few people, but if you want to understand what I mean when I say things like that, go look at an apple. And you will soon see that instead of a single plane, there are a bunch of planes based on how that apple grew on the tree. And those plane shifts are the areas in which the apple itself is now starting to move either closer or further from your eye. And as it does so, that kind of defines things about it. You know, I'm trying here with the shoulder scalloping to define this, but not just have a, you know, cartoony black dark line on it. Because that really doesn't work any better. It has a tendency to flatten an image a lot when you do stuff like that. Doesn't mean that there aren't times that it's necessary, but there are some times where it becomes noticeable that you've now taken and flattened an image by relying on line rather than form. And a lot of what I'm trying to do today is take some of the places where that is more noticeably what I've done and create separations of form based more on the shape of the object than trying to outline the object. And I'm having some degrees of greater success and lesser successes. Actually, let's do that. We're going to come in here, and if I can find the right color. right there. I'm going to attempt to define some of this. So, and you'll notice there are places where I'm not trying to blend absolutely everything that I'm doing into singular colors. I'm attempting to not blend them very specifically, so, which is to say that I'm attempting to make the choices about how I'm blending them in certain areas. But I don't want to necessarily get rid of all of the color that I've laid down, because doing that well, again, like, this looks far more three-dimensional and interesting than if I just had it flat burnt umber. Because especially with, you know, like, this is just kind of a mass of yellows. This was a mass of reds before I started doing it, and doesn't really define anything. So that's why I'm trying to come back. I should have picked out how I wanted to have folds appearing on his battle skirt, pants, what have you, as a, you know, he's bracing himself. I think part of it is I should have that actually as a smaller shape. Like, you should be able to actually see. But maybe his shield's not as big as I'm giving it credit for. And that is one of the things that I'm struggling to work out here artistically, is the... I want the lightness there. I just don't want it as a distinct line. There we go. Let's see if I can get... Let's clean this so I don't start getting too dark. Sorry, this is, if I get quiet like this, it's because I'm trying to problem solve, and that takes a certain portion of my brain that doesn't necessarily allow for me to multitask, i.e. talking to you and applying color to the drawing. So, but yeah, try and get some of this worked in. So, and then so I want to suggest, just carefully, I think I might actually need something you guys haven't seen me grab much of. Actual greens. But what I'm doing here is I want this to be a fairly light treatment, and I'm only gonna come in and try and define the actual break in the hillside. And part of the reason why I am doing this and where I'm letting the implication of a line be more distinct as opposed to what I'm going to do in some other areas of this is there should be a distinctive value change between where the ground is and the sky. And this is an observational thing that no matter how brightly the sun is lighting an object, it is never going to be brighter than the sky if the sky is showing in the image that you're making. And then the other thing that kind of helps in defining this as terrain features as opposed to really anything else, terrain stacks horizontally. Even if it's mountains, you'll notice that, and I get to see this every day I go out and drive here in Colorado, but you'll notice that layers of horizon elements lay on top of each other in roughly horizontal patterns, even when you're talking giant mountains. Now, if I'm implying that this is a giant mountain, I'm likely to come back in and add some ravines and things like that to give it a steep feel, as opposed to this more kind of rolling plain out here closer to where he is. But still want the implication of this hill, that's behind him to be an implication that it is, it's stacked up back there. And so that's one of those things where directionality, like this kind of infers a little bit of the planks that were used to assemble his shield are probably all lined up this way, arranged vertically, so implying a certain verticality to the shield works. And I really should be careful about letting the jackal face interfere with those implications. But the fact of the matter is, that's not going to interrupt somebody's enjoyment of because there would be nothing wrong in and of itself for stacking your shield horizontally. However, when it comes to an overall terrain feature, our brain generally tries to picture that as something that is happening horizontally. That's why we have, you'll have the horizon line, because we kind of know that things of the ground are, by and large, set there in what we would consider to be horizontal positions. For all that, yes, I could have him in some kind of canyon or whatever, fighting his way through. Like, instead of making this sky, I could have made this all rocks and there's a dark, stormy thing and completely, ruin the light that I've established here. And that would change a certain level of things, but I would still, even if we transform this sky patches to rock formations, most of that I would still attempt to establish in horizontal patterns where you can see text, in cases like this where texture's somewhat visible. Because that's how it works in the real world. And so if I'm trying to imply that this is a realistic scene, the more that I can keep what we're seeing relating what I'm trying to show you to what you're used to experiencing, whether you could identify these things or not, really does become a matter of, okay, how good of an artist am I at depicting, naturalistic occurrences? It's why this genre of art, at least in some circles, I don't think it's become an art movement in the way that, say, the Impressionist movement was an art movement. But the notion of what they call realistic or imaginative realism, and I get my terms right here if I'm going to try and name a thing, which kind of spans all the things that you can find in sci-fi and fantasy art. Maybe not every single artist that you encounter who does fantasy art, what will you? But by and large, you have this group of artists out there that, some are the go-tos for all of the science fiction, all the sci-fi book covers and things like that. It's the notion of going, okay, we're drawing fantasy, but we're doing our best within our skill set to make that we're still attempting to obey the laws of naturalism, wherein you're attempting a certain level of direct emulation of what you're depicting. And I realized, because I'm starting to talk art terms, I'm starting to use larger language. I try to avoid that because I don't think talking about art in, super refined philosophical ways does a whole lot for the average viewer. But I do think there is a point of, attempting to give you an understanding of what's going on, what people are trying to accomplish with their stuff. Like I said, like a lot of the artists out there that do fantasy stuff end up having to find their way of working in publishing at some point to do book covers, or depending on who you are, Magic the Gathering and some of these other big corporate entities that allow for more you're getting more exposure. Like, I would get a lot of exposure if I somehow got the attention of an art director for a Magic the Gathering set who sees what I'm doing here for my world and goes, actually, we have a set coming out and we think that what you're showing here is close enough to the look that we're going for here that we'd really like to work with you. And on the off chance that this video finds any of those, I'd love to have the conversation about it. But until or unless something like that happens, I'm just going to keep working in my world and make it my thing, and we'll go from there. But, again, it's properties like that that are trying to build a particular kind of look to their universe that feels like all of these things are as real as we can make them at this point in time, since we don't have any magic to actually, bring dragons back as if we wanted to. Though, those Jurassic Park movies seem to imply that maybe we could find ways. Which, if you're wondering why I would call confuse dinosaurs and dragons, I want to remind you the word dinosaur was invented in the 1800s. It is actually nearer to us in time than than many events in history. Whereas the term dragon for great and terrible lizard things, it's been around for a while. And it's one of the reasons why there are certain discussions about science and what it has found. And living post-Enlightenment, there are certain interpretations that are kind of set out there as you're expected to take this as full go. When I do think there was a certain period of time in which humanity knew of dragons. Just simply the fact that pretty much every culture comes up with some form of creature that seems an awful lot like what we think dragons are. Again, they all have their own take on it, and I'm not saying that it is the same folklore across the world. Far from it on that one. But the fact that similar creatures show up across the world kind of tells me there was something that these societies were encountering that inspired them to create these myths. Without being able to go back and ask them about it, who knows what they were actually using to see them, or like what kind of creature was actually inspiring the myths that that particular culture held on to. And then realizing, like, okay, how much of it then are we going from how much are we bringing the ideas of the Enlightenment, which is essentially, in Europe at least, anything that happened before the Enlightenment happened is highly suspect because rationality was less accepted as the best way to view the world. And this is where, if you've seen and appreciated Jeff Goldblum's character in the original Jurassic Park, for what they put into the movie of his whole reasoning and understanding about why Jurassic Park ultimately was going to be a failure, they do a great job. However, if you get a chance to read the book, I highly recommend it. It makes that movie, it makes the whole thing so much more compelling to me to watch the characters develop as they are developing and all of this. And again, I'm not beating up what Spielberg created with the movies, because they are fabulous movie. It's a fabulous movie. But you lose so much of the philosophy that Crichton put into Dr. Malcolm, and how it is that without even seeing the things that were being put into building the park. Excuse me a second while I blow my nose. Why he sits there and so confidently says this is all going to fall apart, and at this point you've pushed so far into it, there's not a darn thing that you can do to recover yourselves. And he delivers a beautiful critique of science and our changed attitudes towards it. I think one of the most telling quotes from the book is, science has had 500 years to show us what it can do, which means we now know an awful lot about what it can't do. And yet you're still running pell-mell into, well, I can just develop this thing and I will have control over something that is far beyond the capacity of the human. Like, it's every time that I hear us talking about whether it's cloud seeding or, all these other things that we intend to do to save the planet. And I love the fact that Dr. Malcolm basically goes, the planet's gonna be fine. And this is something that if you get into a discussion with me about really any of those kinds of topics, the first thing I'm going to do is go, okay, what do you mean by save the planet? Because I don't think there's anything that human beings can do it would take a series of events that would be so unlikely to come together all at once. I don't think it's a valid kind of concern that humanity can destroy the planet. That said, I think it is well within humanity's powers to make the planet extremely difficult for us to live on, to the point where we are at risk based on our own proclivities, because we can't, we've altered things such that that the planet can't sustain life as we know it. But that is a far different kind of proposal than that the planet will be destroyed. And so that's why conversations that I have on topics of such cataclysmic events, ultimately I go, okay, let's define what it is that you mean, because the verbiage that you use does not match what you're actually worried about. And the really fun part is, in Jurassic Park, Dr. Malcolm pretty much makes that point of, it's awfully arrogant of Homo sapiens to think that they can take the, giant ball of Earth and assume that their actions could do anything except for reset biological time. And he kind of makes that point. Now there are other things that go into it that I don't follow it necessarily to his full conclusions. Again, he's also coming from a materialist's worldview where who and what we are in the present moment is all we've got, and so we better figure it out for ourselves or we're all screwed. I don't happen to believe that as such, but that comes from having my own faith in what I do and why I believe it. But again, the notion that we could do anything except for essentially kill ourselves off is pretty far-fetched for me. And also one of the reasons why I get frustrated with certain folks and movements who they really try to sell that they've got the answers to, as Douglas Adams would put it, life, the universe, and everything. I don't go as absurdist as he does on my understanding of the universe, but yeah, there is a case to be made that it doesn't matter what we do, this planet will be just fine. We just may have, with the invention of atomic weapons and so on, we simply became the first creatures to advance so far in technology that we can destroy ourselves and take with it, kind of the current crop of evolutionary design. Is kind of that's where Malcolm takes it, and within the context of the story of Jurassic Park, that's where we're going with things, and that's why we get that beautiful line in the movies of, you got so fascinated with how you could do it, you forgot to stop and ask if you should do it. And there are variations of that in the book. And it really just does highlight the notion that, there's a lot of the world that seems to think that if we can only science hard enough, we will figure out and understand enough things that we can prevent accidents. And I'm like, the entire sequence of events that happens both in the book and the movie, Jurassic Park, should come as strong warnings to go, okay, we cannot possibly know enough of the variables to make all of this work. It's why you have the dinosaurs that were getting sick, the Triceratops in the movie and the Stegosaurus in the book that were getting themselves sick. Why? Because they didn't understand how herbivorous dinosaurs ate. And that ends up providing a whole set of problems and consequences that, completely confound the scientists who think they're smart enough to create this prehistoric zoo without realizing what they're really attempting is creating a prehistoric world. And that they believe themselves to have isolated themselves enough by being out so far into the ocean that the mainland of the world can't come in and affect their carefully controlled environment. There is the whole notion of, depending on what DNA you use to fill in the gaps of what, of the genetic source material that they're finding. you know, it really just becomes a study of, okay, we think we understood this, we think we've created, you know, because they seem to be biologically viable. You know, we think we've uncovered all of the things. Well, it turns out that, you know, for one reason or another, they've created, you know, dinosaurs that have allergic reactions to things. Because they didn't know enough about how those animals functioned back in the, you know, when they actually were on the earth as viable creatures. And yeah, like I said, I find it to be a very interesting. You know, now I haven't watched any of the new ones with Chris Pratt or anything like that. Don't have an opinion on them. But I do appreciate the suppositions presented in the first movie, at least. And those only deepened as I have since read. Well, I've since had read to me the book by Michael Crichton, and so much more fun to watch the villains get their comeuppance. Very different story, very, very good. So if you're looking for a recommendation on reading, that's one I've got for you right now. All right. Actually, don't necessarily want to get rid of all of the color here. I kind of just want to build up a lighter shape here. Have it look a little bit more. Guys, I think I'm gonna go ahead and cut off there. I think I need to do a little bit more work on greening this hillside a bit more. But I think we're just about done with this one. I need to step back away from it. And need to just see what life is doing outside of my office. So, if you've made it this far, please, please, like, favorite, and share this. Anything that you can do, comment down below so that you can... anything that you do to interact with this will help grow things, where instead of drawing kind of in a void and letting my mind wander, we can live stream here on YouTube and go ahead and actually start building an active community together. Actually, that might not be a bad thing here. Maybe we'll finish this out. But yeah, I am serious about the, you know, do the things that YouTube needs interaction with to push this and my shorts out to others. Because yeah, I'd like to get things going. recognize there are still things like my Patreon. I need to go in and start establishing what the different tiers are so that we can start doing that, because frankly the more of you that can come in and support me through something like Patreon, the more of this I will be able to functionally do. And you know what? I'm also okay if you can't do that, if you can just do the things that bump this in the YouTube algorithms for me, so liking and subscribing to the channel. I hope this has been entertaining enough to earn that from you. And we can continue moving on into bigger, better, brighter, beautiful things. Because that's what I want to do with this channel, is get to the bigger, brighter, beautiful things, so that we all can have a good time together. So, alright, but I am going to go ahead. I will sign off now. Thank you for any of you that managed to stick around this long. I appreciate you listening to my ramblings, as well as I'm sure getting a peek, at least occasionally, at what I'm doing with the drawing. And we'll see if I'm working on this next time, or if we move on to a new challenge for creating token artwork. So yeah. So thanks for dropping by, and I will catch you all in the next one. Let me move things out of my way, and we'll go.